and whip it all night. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Drama is Life, where we talk about drama in life and the different things that come up. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so we're going to have a conversation about grief. Have you ever had those moments where you see somebody that you haven't seen in a long time, and maybe it's been months, maybe it's been a few years? You know, you come to maybe a family gathering, barbecue, dinner, holiday, and you see a cousin, an aunt, or somebody, and you're like, "Oh my goodness, how you've grown!" I was just talking to somebody this week about that, and it made me really start to think about the grief that shows up in growth, right? And so sometimes we don't really think about that. And so tonight we're going to have just a conversation about grief and growth, within growth. And so just like this is not say it keeps curling up. You see, yeah, you see, grief is just like that. It don't always go the way you think it should. When it's growing and stretching and bending and moving, it just could be like just like this, y'all. Just like this, just doing how my hair is just wonky and doing crazy stuff. So, and for those who are listening to the podcast, I know you can't see my hair, but it's imagine just it's twisting and shrinking and doing all kind of crazy stuff. So let's have a quick conversation. So I just had my child just had a birthday, and has been an adult for a few years, but it's that birthday of like you are an official adult. And everybody kept saying, "How you feeling? Right? How you feeling about this?" And I was like, "Well, I don't want to talk about it too much because I may start crying or I may start having different feelings, right?" And I say that because that's exactly how grief is. We look at people and we're like, "I haven't seen you in this many years, and oh my goodness, how you've grown." And you can have a smile like, "Wow," but you also have that moment of like, "Wow, I've missed a lot. I've missed this time of frame that you've grown, that you've matured, that you've changed, that you've had all these different experiences. And I'm seeing you on the outskirts. I'm seeing you at the end result." And so, as a parent, of all the transition times that my son has gone through, every time he's gotten older, teenager, and of course I expect that. I didn't want him to stay an infant forever because then you'd be like, something's wrong with that, right? But once he became a toddler, it's kind of like, oh, he's walking. Then once he became a young boy and he was going to preschool and kindergarten, I was like, oh, he's going to school, right? So I had a grief response. So when we talk about a grief response, that grief is those emotions that come with loss or change or a transition. And those can be different emotions. They can be happiness, they can be excitement, they can be sadness and disappointment and and regret, right? And so a lot of times that happens with grief. Regret shows up. Regret is like, oh, I missed. I should have, right? Those should have, could have, would have that happen. And so it's important during Mental Health Awareness Month that we are that we become in tune to the fact that grief can show up even when somebody is not dying. They can be growing, thriving, and we still have a grief response. My son is absolutely growing and thriving, and I'm not sad about that. But I do have that moment of different emotions because I look back and like, oh man, I remember when, right? You remember when they were crawling and when they depended on you for everything, and you're grieving or having different responses to the fact that that is no longer the case. And sometimes we don't even talk about the grief that shows up in parents when there's a transition because people around them are saying, well, you should be happy. Of course, they're going to grow. And of course, you're thinking, of course they are. That does not take away the fact that I also am having maybe some sadness because I don't have a little boy anymore. Maybe I'm having some sadness because I miss those times of being needed as a parent. I'm saying in general. But I absolutely have had those. And maybe I'm also sad because there are some things that I wanted to do in childhood that now I cannot do. Think about those times where people have passed on, or again, transition, and you're thinking, I'm a missed opportunity. I missed taking them, making that last phone call. Oh, I should have called them. Oh, I should have, taken them out and just took the advantage of that time And now I don't have that anymore. And so sometimes grief happens in growth. And again, this is about a child, but think about people's own personal growth. There's grief that shows up when you begin to grow. Think about your own time of puberty and when things were happening. You're like, oh my God, I can't fit my clothes. Oh my goodness, my emotions are changing. So there's a lot of different shifts that are taking place mentally and emotionally that can bring up a lot. And people really don't talk about grief, even with death, less known talking about it with growth. It doesn't seem like it goes together, does it? Why would you grieve growing up? Why would you grieve something that's supposed to be a positive thing? It's supposed to be this great thing. Like, when you do your hair, it's supposed to go the way you want it to go. And it doesn't. It just be doing whatever it wants to do, right? That's how that's how grief goes. But as a drama therapist, we work with it, right? And just make it work because that's what we do. So I say that because I want to normalize and validate the fact that you can absolutely have grief in transitional times in life. People talk about midlife crisis, and maybe this person is going through, these different things. You lost friends are shifting and changing through adolescence, and now my first grade, second grade friends are no longer my friends. I'm now in middle school, don't have the same, I'm not around the same people. So think about that. That's the kind of growth that's happening. I'm not around the same people. Yes, it's great things happening in my life. It's great transition. I'm happy to be an adult. Maybe that's how, our children feel. And I remember being that, and I still am sometimes that person when I walk into my family, like, oh my goodness, Theresa, oh my goodness, look at how grown you've gotten. People haven't seen me in years, right? This is your son? Oh my goodness. And then they do that whole like surprise look. And, we kind of like, yes, right. But I remember being that person that every time somebody saw me, they had that response. And in my mind, as the young person, I was thinking, well, of course. Did you think I was going to stay the same age and you haven't seen me in 5 years? The obvious mental response is like, of course I've grown. Of course I've gotten taller. Of course I look more mature. Of course I've developed physically because I'm not 10 anymore, right? Or I'm not 15, I'm 20 now. So, and whatever age that may be and whatever time gap that may be, you have those moments where family hasn't seen you in a while or you haven't seen friends, and y'all meet up and those kind of things. But I say that because you say, of course that's happening, but we don't give ourselves that same grace of course I'm grieving that I'm not a child anymore. Of course I'm grieving the missed opportunities of time that maybe I don't really think about. Of course, I may be having emotional responses or thoughts about the changing relationships that are happening in my life. I'm happy to be growing and to be maturing. And even sometimes, even emotionally and physically and spiritually and mentally, yes, I'm growing and that's wonderful. But there's also a grief to that. There's also a sadness that can come with that, disappointment that can come with that, because relationships are changing, especially for those who are people of faith. When it comes to growing in God, growing emotionally, then the people who may not be growing with you or growing at that same pace have to fall off. And not because they did anything wrong, not because they're bad people, because you did something wrong or you're a bad person, but because there's growing paths and they're growing in different directions. And let me give a natural example. If again, you have a friend that's in the fifth grade, and you were in the fourth, I'm in the fifth grade and my friend's in the fourth grade. Now the next year that comes up, I'm going to be in middle school and they're going to be in fifth grade. So it's not that they did anything wrong, that we're no longer friends or we don't talk as much or hang out. We're in two different schools, two different groups of people. I am now around people who are more mature and who are doing very different things, maybe. While you're still in elementary school, you haven't got to sixth grade yet. You haven't got to middle school yet. And so because we're in two different places, we can grieve the changing relationship that's taking place. And sometimes that's what it looks like spiritually, that God is growing you in a lot of areas. And I'm definitely a witness to that, where I'm like, well, what's happening? I was friends with these people and what happened and it's like God is growing you in some areas. And sometimes everybody is not growing at the same pace or at the same level as you. They may be, again, like in fifth grade when you're in sixth, or they may be in eighth grade when you're going to high school. And so until that period of time where they're at that place, you will have a what is called a separation. And again, that causes grief. And we a lot of times we don't even take the time to think about that. We most generally what we do is we bicker about it. Oh my God, I'm missing my friend. We don't even talk no more. You don't even call me, or we say it that way instead of saying, I'm missing my friend. I'm missing that relationship. I'm having sad feelings or disappointments, or I'm having a grief response to this change, this transition. And it's a good change. People are celebrating it. I'm in middle school, I'm in high school, I'm an adult, or whatever my transition time is. People are celebrating it. And I feel that celebration, but I also feel other things too. And if I don't have place for the other things that I'm feeling, then what do you typically do with that? You stuff it and just do the celebration. Yay, I'm excited. But then when I go home and I feel sad, or I'm missing my friend, or whatever is happening that's changing, who do I talk to? Right? There's a song, who do I run to fill this empty space? So there could be those times where maturity is happening and you don't have the same friends. And again, as a parent, now that I'm in that parent role, I remember my mother saying things like, well, okay, yeah, you ain't gonna have the same friends when you graduate high school. Yes, I am. Right? And she kept saying, when you graduate, this gonna be the last time you see this group of people. And we're like, well, no, I'm gonna stay friends with this core people. And then we went to college, and again, nobody did anything wrong. We just went different ways. They were in a whole different state, so we didn't see each other for a while. We didn't talk. Or they were in a different city, and I was over here learning new things in my college. And so again, it's just that growth, the grief in growth. We're growing. We're adults now. We're not in high school anymore. And so I say that because as on the other side, as the parent who has now an adult, there's times where it's kind of like, yeah, I'm so excited that my child, no longer a child, is an adult. But there's also moments of like, wow, that you go back and you think about the things that you may have missed. Those moments I worked. Of course, I'm working now, but I worked when my son was in school. And so there's times that I was like, oh, did I miss more than I wanted to miss? And absolutely I did. And what it would have been like if I was a stay at home mom, or what it would have been like if I would have worked from home, or just all these different questions that you can't go back and change it now, but you have those responses. And so it's important to recognize that, because we just think grief is only about death. You have to be dead to grieve. Somebody has to have had a breakup to grieve. No, there's grief in all types of facets of life. Grief can show up anytime there's a change, anytime there's a loss, anytime there's a transition. Grief shows up, which means, guess what? You're constantly growing, transitioning, and changing. So you've got to constantly be aware that you can have emotions and responses in the grief cycle. I could be angry that, oh man, I miss my son being this age, and I'm angry about something, right? But you can be, but to stay there is unhealthy. I could be sad about it, and what we call depression in the grief cycle, and or grief responses. And yes, it can be only for a moment. You don't want to stay in any one response too long, because then it becomes unhealthy. And so when we talk about or recommend seeing a grief counselor. And people think, well, I don't need to go to therapy. I don't have a mental illness, or I don't have a diagnosis, or I don't have a sickness. You don't have to. Everybody grieves. And it's okay to get help with grief, especially if you grew up in an environment that does not recognize the responses of grief. And even for you, if you don't know what's happening to me, you're asking those questions like, why am I feeling this way, or thinking this, or having these, anxiety attacks, or this is now how I am responding when that was not me before. So when those changes are happening in you, and again, especially when you get older, whether you are, now I'm an adult, yay, But even as an adult, there's changes that are happening from 20s to 30. People had a grief response to their 20s when they turned 30, like, oh man, 20s are gone. Right. And you go back and you say, I should have, I could have, I would have, which brings up, can bring up sadness and disappointment and anger at yourself. It can bring up shame because you feel disappointed in yourself and you feel ashamed that you didn't take responsibilities, or you didn't take advantage of things that could have really benefited you maybe in your 20s. And then your 30s happen. If you know, then when people hit 40, they grieve their 30s and their 20s and sometimes their teens. Then again 50, and it just keeps going. So imagine, as you keep on going, again, as you keep going, relationships continue to change in some cases, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they are solidified around 40, 50, and 60. People start to really get their people. And then what happens when you get older and you're losing those relationships because they are passing away? Right. And so again, there's great, it's great to grow. People are celebrating that you are 80, you're 85, and you're 90, or you're 70. Yay, grandma. And all these, and you're like, yay, I feel excited that I'm growing. But I also feel sad that these things are changing in my life, that I'm losing some things as well in this growth. The same way that when you think about how God develops the body biologically, right? When the baby comes out of the womb, they lose something. The connection to the mother, the physical connection is cut. And again, it's like you excel. Yeah, I'm excited. But that baby has a complete different response sometimes, because it can be where I'm used to that umbilical cord. I'm used to just laying here and the food just coming to me. I'm used to having these type of things happening in my life for me. And now things are changing. Now that's gotten cut off. The umbilical cord is cut. And now I have to do a little bit of work to get some food. I got to root, right? I got to, cry. I have to do different things. And so when that baby stage changes and you go to toddler, now I can't get picked up all the time. I have to walk on my own. So every time that there's a grief change or a transition in your life, or you're growing, there's something that falls off, something that is no longer happening, that really what we call dying. The same way when the baby is born, there's a lot of cells, and this is just a biological lesson for you for 2.5 seconds, that there's certain cells that can only stay alive inside the mother's womb. Isn't that amazing? Isn't God amazing with that? And as soon as the baby is born, if those cells don't die, it'll kill the baby, because the environment is completely different, right? They're in a whole nother environment. They're not secluded inside of a womb. That happens the same way when we are transitioning and growing emotionally and spiritually and mentally in our lives. There are things that are falling off, that they cannot stay with you. Friendships, relationships, mindsets, emotions that you may have carried from 5 and 6 and teenage years cannot go with you in your 40s and 50s. God has to drop them off. He has to kill them off, or they will kill you. And we've seen that happening when we talk about mental health awareness. We've seen that happening where people don't deal with things that took place in their childhood, in their adolescence, in their early 20s, and it's starting to eat away at their life. It's killing them, and nobody knows it because they're smiling. Hi, yes. Because again, grief is not always something that you can see. It's what you experience. And so the person experiencing it can absolutely put a mask on. We talked about that many times. I see my mask. Yay. Those who are on the podcast can't see the mask, but I got a mask on. And so I say all of that just to say this, that it's okay to have multiple responses to grief. And it's okay to recognize that in your growth, you are celebrating, you are exciting, but you can also be grieving what's changing, grieving what's transitioning, and grieving what you're losing. And if you don't grieve that, and when I say grieve it, I mean actually do a healthy release of those emotions, they will stay there and they will build and become stagnant, and they will become contentious inside of your system, and they can carry on to areas in your life that they should have got dropped off. They should have been done away with, but because they never got dealt with, they stay and they cause more issues in latter years when they should have died off in the former. So I say that because again, now that I have a 21-year-old, I am very conscious that there can be grief and growth. And even again, grief in my own growth. I had and have grief responses in my own growth. I'm absolutely celebrating the growth that's happening in my life, growth in my business, but there's a grief to that. There's a grief and a lot of responses to letting go of different mindsets, different emotions, different patterns of behaviors that no longer can work in this new place of growth. And it may be what you're used to, but it cannot live here because it will kill you. It will destroy this new place, this new blessing, this new growth, right? Literally, new growth. So that's what I wanted to share with you all tonight. So thank you for joining. I see you, BJ, and Mother Nellum. I see you. Hello, Robin. Glad to have you all joining us tonight. So I hope that you learned something. Please share. Please share, um, and ping and like and do all those things so people can know that there absolutely is grief and growth that people don't always recognize and that are aware of those things. And it can be causing issues in their life if they don't take that time to recognize it and to validate it and to work on healing it. So hopefully you are absolutely growing in great ways, but you are absolutely allowed to grieve the losses that are happening, the changes that are taking place, and also your transitions. You guys have a blessed and beautiful week as the sun is shining wherever you may be. Hopefully it is. And we are so glad that you guys came and joined us tonight. Thank you again for joining us on The Drama is Life. And we hope that you join us again on our next one. Follow us on all of our social media platforms. You can download our podcast on Spotify up under Drama is Life with our DIL. What is that? Parentheses DIL. And it pop right up. You can download. If you missed any of our episodes, you can absolutely go on there and listen to those. And we would love for you to download it because it gives more support for us. I would appreciate that. And you guys have a great week. Thank you again for watching and listening. Bye-bye.